River Distilling Company, Damian Mitchell alongside Conrad Van Order. Shout out to Molly Wood holding things in production. We are here for another week in college football. We had a lot of action last week in the SEC, and we got the debut of one Hank Brown and the Auburn Tigers. Peyton Thorne hit the bench. If you listen to us on Morning Jocks from 6 to 7 a.m. on Jocks 94.5, we kind of saw this one coming a mile away. Probably saw it a little bit last year. But nonetheless, Hank Brown has taken over for Auburn. Now let's just start with the Auburn Tigers. Last week, you knock off New Mexico. Now you welcome in Arkansas. Both teams sitting at 2-1, first SEC game. And we've seen the highs and we've seen the lows for both of these teams. And now as we're getting to kickoff, it's still kind of in that mode of almost wait and see. But one of these teams has to play their best ball. And I don't even know which way I'm deciding at this point, man. It really is going to be a toss-up to me.
Yeah, the fact that this game seems to be as up in the air, I guess we will call it, as it is when, you go back a month and this game was an afterthought, right? This was Auburn's going to be undefeated going into Oklahoma, and you really didn't even think about the Cows and the Arkansas of the world. It was just, we pretty much had it written in pen. And so the fact that we're here, I will say, I think it has much more to do with how surprisingly good Arkansas has looked, as opposed to, oh, wow, Auburn doesn't look very competitive. I don't think that's the case at all. I've been really, really impressed with what we've seen from Arkansas offensively. Should have won that game against Oklahoma State, but going into this game against Auburn, I just think for Auburn, you're trying to continue on the momentum you built last week, right? Because you got a lot of confidence from Hank Brown. He looked like he wasn't overthinking things the way that Peyton Thorne was. He goes out there 235 yards through the air, 4 touchdown passes, no turnovers in his Auburn debut there. And I think, you don't want to ask him to do too much probably in this game if you're Auburn, right? It's his first experience starting in an SEC game, and a game that if you're Auburn, you probably need to win if you want to have the kind of season that we were talking about them potentially having coming in to the start of the 2024 season. And I think you lean on that running game, because we talked about it last week of, when are we going to see Jarquez kind of be the focal point for the offense? Yep. And if you hadn't heard this stat already, it's going to blow your mind, because last week against New Mexico, first time Jarquez has ever gotten 20 or more carries in a football game in his Auburn career, which just seems like an asinine thing to say with how good he is. But I think we get more of that this week, Damian, right? You want to limit the pressure put on Hank Brown. As long as he can go out there and not turn the ball over, I don't think you need 4 touchdowns from Hank Brown, because I think what you got from this running game last week with Jarquez, over 150 on the ground. Alston had 80 as well on the ground there. So I think we're going to see a large emphasis, a heavy emphasis on this rushing attack for the Tigers.
Yeah, and a lot of it deals with the offensive line as well. Those guys have to continue what they did last week. And I know New Mexico is a completely different animal as it is with Arkansas. But I think what we saw with Jarquez Hunter and the fact they finally made it a point, no, we are just going to hand this thing to 2-7 and see what happens. Even Damari Alston, with the carries that he got too, led to the tune of 268 yards on the ground. And I think that's what Auburn identity has usually been just over the years past. Think of all the great running backs they've had in these, since they've been a program. And I think that's what their identity has always been based off of. You don't need your quarterback that much. You just don't mess it up. And that's why I think was so difficult for people to process when Peyton Thorne was at the quarterback position was you're surrounded finally with the talent that you need, and you still underperform. And I think for Hank Brown going in this situation, you don't necessarily have to be Superman. You don't have to be. You've got all these playmakers around you that can elevate your game, make your job that much easier. And I think for anybody, especially any quarterback, what you need to make sure that you are as comfortable as could be is a solid running game. And I think for Auburn's identity offensively, the more that you continue to have the creases, you continue to keep chopping the wood, keep chipping away against Arkansas's defensive front. Because even UAB had some success last week running the ball against Arkansas. And I know, or at least I have the impression that Auburn has a little bit more talent on that side of the ball than UAB did. So I would lean more to the run game and make Arkansas defend you sideline to sideline all the way through with your run game. You'd be able to attack them inside the tackles. You can hit them on the outside zone. You can stretch them out. And I think for Arkansas, even on their offensive side of the ball, and I asked this question to Mac and Cube, how big of a ceiling or how high of a ceiling do you think Taylor Green has? And I think we've seen him make enough plays within the first 3 games of the season, especially with his legs. It's okay. If he breaks loose, he's going to be dangerous. It's just, can he make those passes consistently across the middle? We've seen him make a couple deep shots, and that receiving core that they have, they're talented. They may not be up there with the Missouris, the LSUs, the Alabamas and things, but they're good enough to make plays, make explosive plays. And you lean on Jaquindon Jackson, but a lot of the focal point is going to be on what Taylon Green does as the quarterback, being smart, being efficient. And again, when he uses his legs, he's a problem.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. And I think he's, the biggest factor. Shocker, the quarterback's a big factor in one of these games, but I definitely think he's the biggest factor in this one. Because I'll be completely honest with you. If you get the best of Taylon Green, he's going to be the best player on that field on Saturday. And I think that that's going to cause a lot of problems for Auburn because, something we've talked about all throughout the week leading up to this is what we saw in that New Mexico game, right? Where credit to Devin Dampier, who's a pretty nice player, the quarterback for New Mexico, and you saw him be able to buy time, extend plays, work outside of the pocket. And there were a few times where Auburn, their defense just allowed New Mexico's receivers to get behind them.
Yep.
And you're able to just throw up these, hope and a prayer type passes, and they were being completed. And so if that's something that plays a role in this game, it could end up being a long day for this Auburn defense. So I think Taylon Green is a huge factor. I mean, you go back to, again, the Oklahoma State game that you lost in double overtime, but he had 475 yards of offense by himself in that football game. And if you look at, you brought up Jaquindon Jackson, the great running back for Arkansas, and the tear he's been on through the first 3 games this year. Taylon Green and Jaquindon Jackson are combining for over 200 yards a game on the ground. That's just what they're doing with their legs. And if we see the best versions of them and the best versions of this Arkansas offense, I think we might have some disappointed Auburn fans when we get back here. But again, we have to see that because we saw as it went with UAB last week, they did have success running the ball on the ground, but Taylon Green looked like a completely different player throwing the ball against UAB than he did against Oklahoma State. So I think that's going to be a big factor. But if you're Auburn, you're going to need some of these guys to step up defensively that maybe have disappointed up to this point in the season. The Keontae Scotts of the world, the Jalen McLeod, a guy who was a huge force off the edge for Auburn last year, has been kind of quiet here early on. Eugene Asante, a name you heard a ton last year if you were watching Auburn games, hasn't been a huge factor so far as well. We know they've got some concerns. They're still figuring some things out in the secondary. This would be a pretty good week to get those things figured out.
Yeah, and I think for Auburn's defensive line in particular, they're going to have to put pressure on Taylon Green. The more you can keep him contained in the pocket, the better your chances on having success defensively. Because like you said, we've seen a lot of inconsistency with him in the passing game. But if he uses his legs, that's where, he's the ultimate equalizer. Because at that point, if you're not applying pressure, and a lot of guys, and we talked about it a little bit last week, it's DJ Durkin to me is either he's not being as aggressive as we're used to seeing, or maybe he just doesn't have the guys on defense that he fully feels confident of calling a lot of these things. But I do think the more pressure that you bring on Taylon Green and that offense and making him hurry up or get into his reads a little bit faster, a little bit quicker, that's going to be your best. That's going to be your best bet. And I think, what Keldrick Falk has been able to do defensively, it looks like he is playing what we wanted to see in Harold Perkins from LSU.
Yes, he's been the best player defensively for Auburn. Yeah,
by far. And I think his impact on everything else that happens within that defense is probably going to be your best calling card. So I think defensively for Auburn, the more pressure that you can have towards Taylon Green, make him think, get his, if you can keep him in the pocket, just keep something around him, make it a little bit cloudy, even if it's just a simulated pressure where you're just holding up and then you're spying from that point forward, I think is going to pay dividends for what Auburn can do defensively. But either way it goes, it's going to be a hell of a ball game.
Yeah, I genuinely think that, we're going to talk about a number of the big games coming up. I know the Tennessee-Oklahoma game kind of grabbing all the headlines, but in terms of just how competitive this game will be and in terms of how close I think it will ultimately be at the end of the day, I think this could be arguably the best game that you get on the Week 4 slate of college football. So going to be a great sight down there in Jordan-Hare Stadium as Auburn opens up SEC play against the Arkansas Razorbacks. Know that a lot of people are looking forward to this one, and hopefully if you're an Auburn fan, Auburn gets right off on the right foot, and then Oklahoma comes into town, and we'll see if they are a wounded animal after facing the Tennessee Volunteers, or if they pull off one of the bigger upsets of the college football season. Well, we'll be back here on Countdown to Kickoff about a lot of other matchups in week 4 for us to break down. But want to remind you again that this show is brought to you by our friends at Dread River Distilling Company. Dread River is the largest and most product diverse distillery in the entire state of Alabama. They're located in Birmingham over on 2400 7th Avenue South. They feature an elegant tasting room, which serves as not only a bar, but also a full service restaurant and an event venue for your next party. So contact our friends at Dread River Distilling Company for all of your drinking needs. When we come back here on Countdown to Kickoff, we'll dive into that Tennessee-Oklahoma matchup. Will Josh Heupel get his revenge on the Sooners? We'll dive into that next on Countdown to Kickoff. Welcome back into Countdown to Kickoff here on Jocks 94.5. Conrad Van Order, Damian Mitchell with you, Molly Robinson holding things down for us as well. Continuing to talk about week 4 of the college football season, Damian, we just broke down Auburn and their SEC opener against Arkansas, but we have the big game of the weekend, the one that everyone's interested in.
Yes, sir.
Of course, Tennessee and Oklahoma. Tennessee traveling to Norman. So not only is it a return trip for Josh Heupel, the national championship winning quarterback of the Oklahoma Sooners, it's also Oklahoma's first ever conference game as a member of the SEC, and you draw a Tennessee team that, in some people's eyes, has maybe looked like the best team in the SEC through the first quarter or so of the season here, Damian. So I know this one, a lot of people are looking forward to it, but I cannot shake my gut feeling that Tennessee's just kind of going to run all over Oklahoma.
That's exactly how I feel. As a Heupel disciple myself, I will say this. A lot of things, a lot of, storylines you can bring into this game. I'm telling you right now, if Josh Heupel is up by more than 2 touchdowns, he is going to empty the clip. I don't think that, and I understand Oklahoma defensively has looked good, but it's their offensive side of the ball. And I think a lot of questions that we had going into the season was, okay, we saw Jackson Arnold one time in a bowl game. Now it's his show. And I think what I will say, Deion Burks is one of those dudes. He's a dude. But I think when you lose Farouk with an injury early on, that offense kind of looks a little stale than what it used to be, because we're just used to Oklahoma being able to line up and give you 50 points a game. That version of Oklahoma is gone. And I think they're leaning on their defense because they know they're in the SEC. And now you're welcoming in, if not one of the best teams in the nation, not just the conference, the nation in Tennessee. Nico has looked pretty much what as advertised. That receiving core is great. The offensive line is good. Dylan Sampson in the backfield has been toting that thing. And I think collectively right now, it's hard for me to say that Oklahoma's defense is going to stop what Tennessee has been able to do. Yes, we understand what UT Chattanooga was. We understand what Kent State was the other week. And NC State, of all teams, maybe they're not as good as we once thought. But a lot of it, to me, deals with more of Tennessee on the defensive side being not the bend but don't break anymore. Tennessee has a legit defense right now. And I think what people are kind of misconstruing, or at least to me when I've watched them, is Tennessee is imposing their will defensively. They're not just, beating up on a UT Chattanooga because it's UT Chat. UT Chattanooga had no answer for their defense. NC State, even with Grayson McCall, who's played years of college football, looked like a freshman against that Tennessee defense. And I think what Tennessee is going to put on the show on Saturday, what they're going to put on the field on Saturday, I think it's going to be a complete game on both sides of the ball. And I find it difficult that Oklahoma really finds a chance of stopping them at any point.
So it's safe to say that Oklahoma fans might want to drink when things are said and done. Well, it's a shame that the game's in Norman, Oklahoma, and not in Birmingham, Alabama, because if it was in Birmingham, all you Oklahoma fans could go visit our sponsor here, Dread River Distilling Company. They have an excellent menu ranging from their hot honey chicken tacos. They have a sweet and spicy Asian orange chicken. They also have a different burger of the week. They have salads, potato bites, everything that you could want, all packed in there at Dread River Distilling Company. And that doesn't even get to the handcrafted cocktails that they'll make for you, Damian. All of their ingredients, not just the liquors themselves, but all of the ingredients that go into the cocktails are handmade right there in-house at Dread River. So a great place, game day, any weekday. Go kick back, sit back, enjoy a nice handcrafted cocktail courtesy of our sponsor, Dread River Distilling Company. But getting back to Tennessee and Oklahoma, I just have a lot of concerns for this Oklahoma team. Not in look, you're undefeated at this point. I think Jackson Arnold has been pretty good. Maybe not. He's not elite, which I know that's asking a lot for somebody that had made one career start and it was in the bowl game last year. But it's a similar situation of what we got with Nico, right, on the Tennessee side of things. Both guys were 5-star recruits coming out of high school. Very, very, very high expectations for both of these guys coming in. And I feel like it's kind of unfair because I think we all know that Josh Heupel, as we saw with Hendon Hooker, when he has a quarterback that fits that offense, the sky is the limit. But for Oklahoma, while defensively they have gotten better each year, I feel like under Brent Venables, when you're scoring 16 points against a group of 5 team, or you're, having close matchups against Tulane, which I know we saw that in the Lincoln Riley era as well, I just don't know how much confidence it gives you when you're going up against a Tennessee team that, like you were saying, I don't think anybody's shocked to hear, well, they're one of the top 3 offensive teams in the country. They're also one of the top 3 defensive teams in the country. And so I just feel like, wow, you're going to have the emotional factor is going to be on the Oklahoma side of things, obviously welcoming Josh Heupel back. But I also feel like something we talked about on 3-Man Front earlier in the week is if you go back to Josh Heupel, and we all know what he did as a player there, but he was also the co-offensive coordinator for a handful of years there under Bob Stoops. And in 2014, Heupel was let go. Oklahoma had by their standards, I guess, a bad year. They went 8-5. The offense was not where they wanted it to be. And so they let Josh Heupel go. And so now you're getting to return and play the team that, yes, you won a national championship for. It's your alma mater. I'm sure there are tons of fond memories that Heupel will always have about his time in Norman, Oklahoma. But I guess your last experience or your last memory with them is being let go because their offense wasn't good enough when you were the co-offensive coordinator. Well, now he's clearly figured something out at Tennessee, and I'm not going to be surprised if, look, I know people weren't happy about the onside kick we saw last week.
You got to practice it sometimes.
If you're doing that when you're playing the Kent States of the world, do you really think that Josh Heupel doesn't want to run it up on Oklahoma and kind of send a message of, oh yeah, remember me? I'm pretty good at my job.
Yep.
I know a thing or two about offense. So, it goes both way on the emotional factor, but just I question Oklahoma's ability to keep up because even if they're able to limit Tennessee offensively, what does them being limited look like? Oh, they're only going to score 45 as opposed to 60 or 50 plus, whatever it is. And then offensively for Oklahoma, I just don't know if they have the pieces to keep up if this thing gets out of hand. You're going to have to. I think Tennessee's going to have to turn the ball over multiple times. You're going to have to be penalized a lot and probably in key situations that benefit Oklahoma. It's just there are so many things in my eyes that would have to go right for Oklahoma and against Tennessee for them to be able to win this game. And maybe we're all fools, right? Maybe we're here a week from now and Oklahoma pulls off the upset and, Tennessee was overrated, NC State wasn't any good, and Kent State and whatever. But it's the deck is definitely stacked against the Sooners right now.
Yeah, and I let me go ahead and tell you, if Oklahoma pulls off this upset, the slander I'm going to receive of being the Heupel disciple will be insane. I'm going to need some protection.
It's going to be tough for you.
It's going to be absolutely wild. But I agree with you for a lot of what you said because when you look at Oklahoma, Tennessee to me is starting to approach where Alabama is as far as you have the opposing team has to play perfect and hope Alabama makes a few mistakes because I do think if Tennessee plays their A+ game and Oklahoma plays their A+ game, Tennessee is still better than Oklahoma. Where if Tennessee plays their B+ game and Oklahoma plays their A+ game, that's the only way you're going to win. If, like you said, you got to be able to turn Tennessee over and not settle for field goals. You're going to score touchdowns because of the quick strike offense that Tennessee has. And I think with the receiving core that Tennessee now has, Brew McCoy coming back from injury, you got Squirrel White. You finally Dante Thornton has shown up to what they needed him to be. Chris Brazzell, the transfer coming in from Liberty, there to that offense as well. I think that Tulane. My apologies. I think now with Josh Heupel and his offense, what he has true balance. He doesn't feel, the need to have to throw the ball 70 times a game. No, we can hand this thing off to Dylan Sampson and let him go. That offensive line is really some road graders up front. And I think for Oklahoma defensively, if you don't turn the ball over or make them punt, you're going to start chasing at that point. And I don't think Oklahoma's offense is good enough right now to be in a track meet with Tennessee and expect to win the ball game.
And I think that's one of the things that makes Tennessee so dangerous, right? Is they are set up in a way where they can win with the big explosives, as we've seen, but they also are so good running the football now that if they want to, they can just kill the time of possession and limit the number of possessions that you are going to get. And with how good their defense is, they can just win in a multitude of ways. It really has been impressive. Now, their first real test of the season as the Volunteers travel up to Norman for their SEC opener against the Oklahoma Sooners, the return visit for Josh Heupel. Well, from maybe not the class of the SEC, but from the biggest matchup in the SEC this weekend, we have to talk about the worst matchup in the SEC. And no, it's not the Vanderbilt game. It's the Florida and Mississippi State game. So when we come back here on Countdown to Kickoff, we will dive into Florida versus Mississippi State. If Florida loses this game, will it be the end of the road for Billy Napier? We answer that question for you next here on Jocks 94.5.
Welcome back into Jocks Countdown to Kickoff. Damian Mitchell, Conrad Van Order, also Molly Robinson holding things down for you. And we wouldn't be here without our great sponsors, Dread River. Listen, if you go down their menu, let me just give you a sample size because I think a lot of people are going to need this after they watch Florida and Mississippi State. They give you a beer and a shot. It's on the menu. You pick your choice of beer, you pick your shot. And I guess you'll probably have to do that after every quarter, depending on who's going to be taking the lead because Florida and Mississippi State, if you would have told me this 5 or 6 years ago, that this may be two of the worst teams in the SEC, would have thought you were crazy. Think about this. When the first college football playoff rankings were unveiled, Mississippi State
number one, baby,
was number one in the country. And I think when you look at this game going into it Saturday, Billy Napier, you're pretty much a dead man walking. You win your first SEC game, but it's against arguably the worst team in the conference.
Yes.
And you're a 6-point favorite on the road. You still have issues at quarterback that I don't really know if you have an answer for, because when Graham Mertz was out there, it didn't really feel like he was doing anything necessarily wrong. It's just the offense didn't look that good. It just didn't look like it was flowing well. And then when DJ Lagway gets in, he looks like a freshman. And it's not the Sanford defense across the field from you as it was against Texas, like it was against Texas A&M. And I think for Florida right now, you're desperate for a win. And Billy Napier, you live to fight another day. On the flip side of that, Mississippi State, you lose to Toledo. And it doesn't matter.
Ugly.
Yeah.
Not even close.
When a MAC team goes into SEC country and blows you out, it's a bad look for everybody involved. And Mississippi State, when you talk to their fans, like, they're prideful. They love their Bulldogs. They understand that, hey, we're probably never going to be the best, but by God, we don't want to be the worst. But right now,
you're the worst.
You're the worst. Yeah. And that's crazy when Vanderbilt is now in the conversation of being, quote unquote, middle of the pack SEC teams. And because of what Mississippi State has done. Yes, I know Jeff Lebby inherited a situation that the past 3 years have just been bad. It's been very uncomfortable.
I was about to say, Zach Arnett inherited a bad situation, which was then passed along to Jeff Lebby.
Yeah, and, the passing of Mike Leach in that situation where, the air raid just felt like Mississippi State was leaning into that identity. It was their thing, and they played great defense on top of that. But now you're just kind of picking up the pieces of going from more of a run and a ground and pound game with Zach Arnett playing good, fundamentally sound defense with the guys that you have. Now you're going back to more of an explosive offense, but when it's not clicking, you have situations like that against Toledo. And now we're sitting at 11 o'clock on a Saturday saying one of these teams is going to win an SEC game, and it might be their last SEC win for the rest of the year.
Yeah, I think that's a very realistic possibility for both of these teams. And just what you saw from Florida, the biggest knock I have on this Florida team isn't necessarily their record right now. It's how they've looked on the way to their record. Because last year, I mean, we all remember the big win over Tennessee, and everyone we were wrong about Florida, and then it turned out that they really showed up for that one game, and they were middle of the pack the rest of the way. But they weren't a bad football team last year. They were competitive. It just, it felt like something was missing. And then you come into this year, you see the schedule, it's probably not going to be pretty, but you felt like, okay, another year with Graham Mertz, like they've got talent on the roster. They're not going to win a lot of games, but they're probably going to be a thorn in a lot of teams' side, right? And that's the biggest criticism I could have of this Florida team right now is they just look pitiful out there. I mean, you go and look at what happened against Texas A&M with a backup quarterback making his first start, and it looked like they were playing two different games out there on the football field. And, you know, I like Billy Napier. I don't think he's a bad guy. I don't think he's a bad coach. But when it just makes it feel like maybe you've lost the locker room a little bit. Maybe guys aren't giving the effort that you would have seen them giving last year, and now that seems to have completely dissolved for Florida. So you need to win this game for morale, right? Like, you have to be able to prove, okay, we can win a game in the SEC, try to get a sliver of momentum to carry you into the rest of your schedule because it's just brutal for the rest of the way. But on the flip side of that, if you are Billy Napier and you go on the road to Mississippi State, which, fun fact, Mississippi State is 7-5 all time against Florida in Starkville.
That's wild.
If you lose this game, if you're Billy Napier, I don't think he survives. And part of that is the bye week comes up next for Florida. So you have Mississippi State, bye week, and then UCF. It seems like maybe a logical time to cut ties with Billy Napier, have somebody in as an interim coach, and then they have a week plus to kind of rally the team and prepare for the rest of the season. But I don't know about you, Damian, but for me, Florida's a better team. They should be able to win this game, but I also don't have nothing I've seen from them this year on the field inspires me and gives me confidence that they're going to do that. And if they do ultimately lose to the Bulldogs, I think Billy Napier's done.
Yeah, I agree with you as well, too. When you look at where they are right now, and to your point, it's one thing to have Miami beat you, and the way that they did it, it felt like, okay, now either Miami's really good or Florida's really bad. Then you follow that up, you have a great showing against Samford. Again, quality of competition.
You should have a good showing against Samford.
Exactly.
Yes.
And then when you follow that up with Texas A&M, who at that point was still trying to figure out who they were offensively.
They didn't look good going into that game.
Right. And then when Marcel Reed comes in, makes his first start, he goes out there and cooks. And I think for Florida, it's just a bad situation to be in because all offseason long, we're kind of, racking our head of, okay, maybe if they're a little more competitive in some of these games. They weren't that far away last season. They took Missouri, a top 10 team in the nation, to the wire. Mm-hmm. So they have the ability to do it. But now with 3 games into the season, the way that it looks offensively, they don't look like they have an identity. They don't know whether they're going to run or pass. It just doesn't feel cohesive on any side of the ball. And when you look at some of the effort on some of the players, and as a former player myself, there's a lot of things that, you don't want to really talk about, but it didn't really feel like a lot of guys were given everything that they possibly could to win the football game. Because I don't think Florida, I don't think Texas A&M is 20 points better than you in 2 halves of play. I just don't. And with all the talent that you're able to have down there in Gainesville at your disposal, the state of Florida is literally yours. You're right there. All the speed and all the guys that you could bring in to that program and not have a better showing than what you've had so far, I think it's very difficult. But like you said, you're favored going into this game. When it's kind of cut and dry, you are the better team. But you don't feel confident or comfortable saying that Florida goes in there and handles their business because, again, Mississippi State, to their point, those cowbells are going to be rocking. They're going to have it rocking there in Davis Wade. But I do think that it's going to be, no pun intended, it's going to be a dogfight to get that victory out of there. And if you don't, I'm with you, Billy Napier. We appreciate your time, but it's pretty much up.
Yeah, and the bad news for Florida is we found out a couple days ago that Eugene Wilson, their best receiver, he's going to miss this game. He's probably going to miss the next couple of games, at least for Florida, after he had a minor surgery earlier this week. You have Montreal Johnson, who did come back from his injury. He came back last week. He had 7 carries for -7 yards. I'm not the best mathematician, but those aren't good numbers. Those are not good averages. And so maybe it just he needs a little time to get back in the swing of things, and we see a different Montreal Johnson that we expected because he is a very nice piece at running back.
Absolutely.
And he can be one of their better offensive weapons when he's healthy, but it also goes back to quarterback play, right? Are you going to get more of Graham Mertz, more of DJ Lagway? Because to your point, Graham Mertz hasn't necessarily done anything wrong. It just feels like the offense is maybe a little limited, whereas with DJ Lagway, you're going to have the lows that come with playing the freshman, but you're also going to see some of the really high highs and some of the incredible throws that he can make. So where do you fall on that if you're Billy Napier and that staff? Do you go with maybe the more stable, but less explosive option, or do you go with the boomer bust kind of guy in DJ Lagway? So that's certainly going to be something that's interesting to pay or to watch and pay attention to in this matchup. But again, it's crazy to say that Florida versus Mississippi State is the worst matchup in the SEC, and thankfully it kicks off at 11 a.m. so you can kind of get it out of the way and then enjoy the rest of your day. But have some other matchups around the conference that we have to get to. Of course, Missouri taking on Vanderbilt. We've got some ranked matchups outside the SEC, USC, Michigan, one of the big ones there as well. So when we return here on Countdown to Kickoff, we will dive into the rest of the Week 4 college football slate. You're listening to Jocks 94.5. Welcome back into Countdown to Kickoff on Jocks 94.5. Conrad Van Order, Damian Mitchell, Molly Robinson here getting you ready for Week 4 of the college football season. And we are brought to you each and every week here by Dread River Distilling Company. Go give them a visit on 2400 7th Avenue South there in downtown Birmingham. Their elegant tasting room is everything from a full-service bar. They have a full-service restaurant as well as an event venue. So they have all of your bases covered there, all of their cocktails, including all of their ingredients, not just the liquors, but everything that goes into the cocktails are completely handmade right there at Dread River Distillery. So make sure you go give them a visit and tell them that you heard about them here on Countdown to Kickoff. All right, Damian, we've got the rest of the Week 4 slate to dive into. We've got Vanderbilt, Missouri, as well as some top 25 matchups outside of the SEC. But let's start off here with Missouri and Vanderbilt. Now, Vanderbilt, a bit of a surprise, I think, for a lot of people. I know that they lost to Georgia State. That was unfortunate in a close game there for Vanderbilt, but they've looked much improved over the first few weeks of the season. Not only Diego Pavia coming in at quarterback and giving them a different dynamic at that position than they've had in a while, but Clark Lee taking over the defense in the offseason. That unit has looked much improved, and you're now going to play a Missouri team that Boston College kind of gave them everything they wanted, right? In the first half of that game, it was all Boston College, but Missouri did come back, get the win 27-21. So now going into this game, you have a top 6 Missouri team taking on Vanderbilt. Is there any chance in your mind that Vanderbilt not only keeps it close, but any chance they could actually pull off the upset?
I don't know if they can win the ball game, but I think they're good enough now, right now, just 3 games in. They're good enough to make it difficult for Missouri to just open the can. And I think what Boston College was able to do with Missouri was really attack the line of scrimmage. Like Thomas Castellanos, he's dynamic with his legs, but I think the fact that they made it a point of, we're not going to try to get cute. We ain't going to try to, fancy or anything. No, this is just going to be a football game.
He had 13 carries for 16 yards.
Right.
That's pretty good right there. If you're Missouri defense, that's pretty good.
And I think they made it a point that, all right, big dog, like, if y'all want to make this a fist fight, we can. And I think Missouri, the biggest question mark I had was, can Brady Cook continue at the level that he's played? And he's actually kind of started to make me a little bit more of a believer. And I think him and Peyton Thorne were very similar, Auburn's former quarterback, that at some point, maybe the pieces around him have to be a little bit better to elevate where he is. And I think that's what Missouri has done with their run game. Think about Noel in the backfield. Think of everything that we saw with Garrett Schrader last year. And the way that he was able to run the ball. And I think now Missouri is like, okay, we're not afraid to continue this trend. We know what we have at receiver position. Luther Burden, it doesn't matter what DB you have out there. We still going to find a way to give him the ball. But I think what Noel was able to do in the run game for Missouri is what keeps this offense, okay, not just above float, but still dynamic, because it's very similar to Tennessee, that they're not afraid to, if we need to air this thing out, we can do it. Brady Cook's good enough to do it. And if we need to make this ground and pound, we can. And I think that Missouri defensively, they're a little bit more scrappy than I gave them credit for. And I think coming into the season, I had, issues with, all right, maybe they're not as good as they were last year because they're not going to be able to, stop a lot of these teams from scoring a lot. And they've kind of made me a believer too. Like Missouri, to me, after the first 3 weeks of the season, I'm leaning more towards, all right, maybe they could be a playoff team. Maybe they are there. And I think Vanderbilt, and this is not your mom and pop's Vanderbilt team, they're good enough to beat them. I don't know if they can do it, but I do think Missouri is good enough right now that if they get up a couple touchdowns, it could get out of hand, and Vanderbilt just won't have an answer for them.
Yeah, I'm with you with what you just said about Missouri and how you're a little more of a believer now. I definitely think that they are capable of making the playoff, no doubt about that. My question with them really all season long was, I believe that you can come in and kind of replicate what you did last year. And I know everyone goes, well, they beat Ohio State in the bowl game. Yeah, you beat an Ohio State team that didn't have a lot of their starters.
Right.
It doesn't mean it wasn't impressive, but that's a much different matchup than what you're going to see if you're in the college football playoff and you're going up against a fully loaded roster of an Ohio State, an Oregon, a what have you from some of these other conferences. But the thing that gives me more confidence for Missouri right now is Luther Burden and Brady Cook haven't really had to do too much yet, right? Like I feel like we have not seen the best that Missouri can be, specifically offensively, at any point so far in the season. Because you look at Brady Cook, he only has 2 touchdown passes through the first 3 games of the season. Luther Burden is averaging about 60 receiving yards a game, and that's it. And we know how talented those guys are, and it feels like, not that they're holding back necessarily, but just they don't need to show everything yet.
Right.
And that's what makes Missouri so dangerous to me is I feel pretty good about how they've looked through the first 3 weeks, and I feel like we haven't even really begun to scratch the surface of what Missouri can potentially be this year. But it'll be interesting to see if Vanderbilt can keep it interesting. How interesting can they make it? Because maybe this is, I don't know, maybe coming off the win, a ranked win against a Boston College team where you had to scrap a bit to get the win. Maybe this Vanderbilt team comes in and surprises you. Maybe Missouri, they're just looking at it, it's Vanderbilt. I don't know, but it'll be an interesting matchup, to say the least. So we do have another top 25 matchup outside of the SEC to get to. So again, Tennessee, Oklahoma, the big top 25 matchup, but USC, Michigan. Obviously, if Michigan didn't look as poorly as they did against Texas, this game would be a little bit bigger. But now Michigan making a quarterback change. We know Alex Orji's now going to be the guy after they bench David Warren. But this USC team and Miller Moss and what they've been able to do through the first 3 weeks of the season, they've only played 2 games. They already had a bye week. But I think everyone, myself included, was really, really impressed, not only with the offense, but really with the defense and how they looked against LSU in the season opener. They're not an elite defense by any stretch of the imagination, but they've improved significantly. And I just think Michigan's so limited offensively right now. They have not been able to get into a rhythm with Donovan Edwards. He's been a disappointment there coming out of the backfield. Their quarterback situation's been a mess up to this point in the season. The defense is still good, but I just don't know if offensively they can keep up with a team like USC.
Yeah, and you got to think about, for USC, think of the identity change that they've had because now they're in the Big Ten. And just think of, no pun intended, and shout out to Taylor Swift, but Lincoln Riley had a big reputation of not really focusing on the defensive side of things. Sorry, I had to throw that one in there. But no, I think that the biggest issue for USC was always defense. It felt like tackling was optional. And they were not strong in the trenches. But when you go back and watch that LSU game, it felt like USC defensively, their front 7 were making it hard for LSU just to get up on blocks, work up the linebackers. And I think that's what their identity is starting to face themselves, because we know what Lincoln Riley is offensively. We know what's going to come. We got Miller Moss, who I think has stepped up and really, really, of course you can't replace everything that Caleb Williams did for you, but he's looked pretty good. And I think the fact they're including Woody Marks in that run game too, USC to me is really starting to come into their complete own. Whereas the question marks we had with Oregon, with their first couple of games of the season, we're not really having that with USC. It's okay, is this defense going to break eventually, or no? They're going to continue to step up. And I think when you look at this matchup with Michigan, we know what Michigan wants to do. They want to ground and pound. They're not going to be pretty about it. This is what's happening. And to your point with Donovan Edwards, a guy that graced the cover of NCAA football, he hadn't really gotten that return on investment. So I think that for Michigan's sake, you don't want this game to get out of hand because you're not talented enough offensively to catch what USC is going to do for you if they get up pretty big on you. So I think USC goes and handles their business with Michigan.
Yeah, I'm right there with you, but that is one of the games that a lot of people have their eyes on this weekend. But that'll do it for week 4 of Countdown to Kickoff here on Jocks 94.5. We'll be back. Man, next week is going to be a good one, isn't it, Damian? Because, of course, there's other games, but let's be honest, everyone's going to be talking about Alabama and Georgia. So that will be coming up for you next week on Countdown to Kickoff here on Jocks 94.5. But again, want to give a shout out to our wonderful sponsor, Dread River Distilling Company. Go give them a visit at Dread River Distillery in Birmingham. They are located off of 2400 7th Avenue South in downtown. And their elegant tasting room includes a bar, a full-service restaurant, and an event venue to take care of any need that you may have. Go visit our friends at Dread River Distilling Company. Well, that'll do it for us. I'm Conrad. That's Damian. Molly Robinson holding it down for us. Appreciate you tuning in for the Week 4 edition of Countdown to Kickoff here on Jocks 94.5.